Hey everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Spacebar. This is episode 11, How to Troubleshoot. Today we're talking about what I think is one of the most important skills that anyone serving in live production, performing on stage in whatever capacity, it's one of the most important skills to have, and that's to be able to very quickly troubleshoot. Now, if this is your first time to Behind the Spacebar, this is a show for playback techs, musicians, music directors, worship leaders, really anyone that uses Ableton Live on stage. So if that sounds like you, then you are in the right place. Now, before we get into today's content, and this is one of my favorite things to teach, whether I'm teaching at a conference, I'm teaching this in a podcast, doing a video series, whatever it is, I love talking about the topic of troubleshooting. I think it's super, super important. But before I get into that, I want to take just a second to say, if you are using Ableton Live and you want some free resources to help you use it in a better, more efficient way, then head to FromStudio2Stage.com/free. You can go there, you can download my free tracks template, some free click tracks, guide cues. What else do we have? LTC files that you can drag into Ableton Live. Tons and tons of free resources. So if that's you and you use Ableton Live on stage, then head to FromStudio2Stage.com/free and check out everything we have available there. Okay, with that, let's get into today's content. Now, I think I'm going to share really four kind of steps in order to troubleshoot and to troubleshoot well. But the first step is maybe the most important, and it's the one that's easy to gloss over because it's not a technical thing. But if you're in a situation where something goes wrong, particularly in a live performance scenario, you're on stage, you're doing production off stage, whatever it is, but it's in a live kind of performance venue and space. The most important thing you can do is just to stop and breathe, right? Just stop and take a deep breath. And the reason that's super important is it's really easy when something goes wrong to just think immediately, I gotta go fix it. But when we get in that mindset, when we're in that mindset, it's really easy for us to forget simple things. It's easy for us to gloss over an obvious mistake. And we'll talk about why sometimes most common cause of issues is common, simple things. But I think this is the most important piece, because if we just can pause and just take a deep breath, it's going to isolate us. It's going to remove us from the scenario for a moment. It's going to do two things. One, it's going to kind of give us a reset. And so things are going crazy. People get panicked. People get stressed. Just going to pause, take a deep breath. That's going to isolate us from the situation. It's going to help us kind of reset. But then I think the other benefit of that is because it's isolating us from the scenario, sometimes it's almost like we can then see the scenario from a bird's eye view, as opposed to being in the moment, being stressed and unplugging cables and just starting to go crazy. We can kind of see it from a bird's eye view. And that's really the approach you need to take when it comes to troubleshooting is you can't be stressed. You can't be panicked, because if you are stressed or panicked, again, you're going to miss simple things. You're going to gloss over simple things. And it's just something you've got to be in the moment. You've got to be able to think really systematically. You've got to visualize, and we'll talk about all those tips and tricks, but you've got to be in the moment, but you also have to be kind of outside of the moment, looking over, being able to remove yourself from the potential panic of the scenario. Another tip, and this is not on my notes that I made, but another tip kind of related to this that my buddy Al always talks about is, if you're in a scenario where, let's say you're on stage, you're a musician or you're a playback tech off stage, but you're troubleshooting an issue with Ableton Live. Let's say it's rehearsal. The show's about to start. Maybe you're like sound checking or something. Doors are in 15 minutes and some sort of automation you're doing isn't working. Let's say that's the scenario we're in. My buddy Al always brings this up as an example of something goes wrong. A lot of times you'll get people that kind of flock to you and come over, and the drummer comes over, the bassist comes over, the tour manager comes over, the artist comes over, and everyone just kind of starts to crowd around, and that's not a great environment to work in. And so Al always suggests, hey, in a moment like that, just tell everybody, hey, listen, I just need a couple moments to fix this. Give me 2 minutes and it will be fixed. Or give me 2 minutes and I'll report back and let you know where we are. But I just need a little bit of space to kind of focus on my own. And taking that deep breath and maybe mentioning that to people just to let them know, like, you guys kind of have to back up right now. You got to give me some space. And there's kinder ways to say that than like, bro, you need to back up. Maybe that's the way you say it to get that space. But that's a real helpful thing as well, too. So that's kind of a bonus tip that's thrown in there. Okay, before we dive into the rest of this, steps 2 through 4. I essentially want to give you an idea of hopefully a foundation, a framework to kind of think of troubleshooting. Sometimes we think of it as a really difficult thing. We get in highly technical fields and signal flow, and whether it's video routing or audio routing, or we're going from Ableton to control this automation thing to control that automation thing. It's really easy to suddenly feel like this is a difficult thing. Like it's really easy to get overwhelmed. But troubleshooting is essentially 2 steps. It's 2 things when we think of kind of paths. Number 1 is we need to find the problem. We need to figure out what's the problem, what's going on. And then number 2, we need to fix the problem. So we're going to find the problem. And then 2, we're going to fix the problem. Okay. So now let's dive into this. So essentially all of troubleshooting is doing 2 things. That's our framework we're working from. We're finding the problem, we're fixing the problem. Let's talk about number 2. How do we find the problem? How can we quickly find the problem? Here's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 really quick tips I have. And this is going to be a pretty short episode. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. But 5 really quick-ish tips that I have for finding the problem. Number 1 is visualize the path, visualize the signal flow. If you need to, I mean, I've got a pen and some paper here. Like even if you really needed to, grab a piece of paper, grab a pen, and draw out the signal flow. Like you pausing, you taking the moment to think through signal flow, even getting to the point of, again, I mean, if it's a quick solution, you're on stage, something goes wrong. Hopefully you can do this in the matter of 5 to 10 seconds. But let's say it is doors open in 15 minutes. You've got a problem. It's a pretty complex problem. The only way for you to understand it is to take a minute and draw out a kind of rough signal flow diagram. If you take that minute to figure that out and it helps you solve the problem in 3 minutes, as opposed to trying to keep it all in your brain and think through it in your brain and not feel really confident or comfortable about the signal flow unless you write it out, and that ends up taking 12 minutes. Well, which one's better? Take the minute to write that out if you need to. So if you need to write it out, great. If not, just close your eyes for a second and visualize the signal path. Like let's take this microphone right now. So I've got this microphone, which is on a mic stand, which I have an XLR cable. The XLR cable goes from here into my audio interface. My audio interface is connected to my computer via a Thunderbolt cable. Okay. And then this particular hardware interface allows me to run plugins off of the hardware. So if I look at the plugin, actually, let's open the plugin chain here so I can look at this. If I look at this plugin chain, I have like a preamp model loaded in, I have a channel strip loaded in, and I have a compressor type model loaded into this as well too. So if something goes wrong with, and then let's go out of there. How do I get into my ATEM that I'm recording from? Okay, I've got an output of the interface that then is going into an input, the mic input on my ATEM. So if something goes wrong in this chain, it could be one of many things. It could be the XLR cable. It could be the mic itself. It could be the ATEM. It could be the cable going from the ATEM to the interface. It could be the cable going from the interface to the computer that's maybe not connected properly. It could be one of the many plugins that's loaded onto this vocal chain that I'm using to get to the ATEM. That might feel overwhelming, but just for me, visualizing that process and thinking through that process, that actually helps me understand everything that's involved, all the many different variables that are involved in this. And that's going to help me as I walk throughout this process to, again, to number 1, find the problem, and then 2, fix the problem. So the second thing I do, so first, visualize the path, signal flow, a skill that if I'm talking to someone who's interested in live production, if I understand that, or if I get a sense that they really understand signal flow, whether it's audio or video, or they have the brain capacity or the tools or the skills to like figure out signal flow or draw out a signal flow diagram, then they're going to go pretty far in this, because that's just a tool that can transfer between audio to video, even to networking, to, creating a connected stage, network stage experience. All of those are really, really similar processes. And if you can get it in one scenario, in one domain, it kind of carries over to the other. But number 1, visualize the path, signal flow. Number 2, change only one thing at a time. So as you're trying to figure out, find the problem, we're not at fixing the problem yet. We're just simply finding the problem. As you're thinking through your chain, change one thing at a time. Don't unplug your XLR cable, add a new XLR cable, get a new mic, change the Thunderbolt cable going from your interface to your computer. Because if you do that, if you change multiple variables at once, you're not going to know what the problem was in the first place. And you might be in a scenario where you're kind of like making the problem worse by swapping out variables as opposed to just one thing, right? So as you go to find the problem, change one thing at a time. Think about your signal flow, start on either one end or the other and work your way through. It's a potential scenario, but only do one thing at a time, change one thing at a time to test it to see if that works. Third thing, and this is maybe the most important part of all this, I definitely think pausing and stopping to breathe is the most important, but in this process of finding the thing, one of the most important things that hopefully I can impart to you is start with the simple things. The two number one problems that are, I would say 95% of the time are the cause of issues. When it comes to troubleshooting, 95% of the time it comes down to two things. Is it plugged in? Is it powered on? Is your power turned off? Is your cable plugged in? A story I often tell is when I was living in Florida, I was on staff at a church there. I was playing guitar on stage and doing tracks and stuff for Ableton. And I remember one time playing acoustic guitar at the time, and this was pretty old. So we had floor wedges. I mean, this is a while ago. So we had floor wedges as opposed to in-ears. Excuse me. And I remember me not being able to hear my guitar and the floor wedge. And so I talked to our worship leader, who then communicated to the audio engineer and said, "Hey, Will needs a little more acoustic in his ears." He said, "All right, go ahead and play." So I played, and the sound engineer said, I'm not getting acoustic. And I thought, oh, and it's just one of those moments you're like super frustrated and things aren't going right. And you're just like, this guy's an idiot. Why can't he turn my acoustic up? And it's everyone's fault and it's everyone's problem but yours. And then I look down on the ground and I see my 1/4-inch cable coming out of my tuner. That's just the other end is laying on the ground as opposed to going into my acoustic guitar. And I said, oh, okay. So I mute my acoustic, and I told the worship leader to relay this to the audio engineer. I said, "Tell him it's a high impedance air gap." So he told him, and the guy kind of chuckled and realized what it was. So then I went and grabbed my guitar cable, plugged that into my acoustic, and muted my tuner, and everything was good. And that was a scenario where if I would have just went, okay, and then said, "Is it plugged in?" Nope, it's not plugged in. Grab the cable and we're good to go. I would have fixed that. It would have gone a lot faster, a lot smoother than me saying, "Hey, can I get more acoustic in my monitor?" The sound engineer taking time out of his day to go, I'm not getting it. Me getting frustrated to find out it was a cable that wasn't plugged in. So check, is it plugged in? Number two, is it turned on? And that's a real easy thing. And you might listen to that and go, "Will, this is like so basic." We're talking about complex things here. We're talking about using Ableton Live to control video, to trigger video, to control lights, to trigger program changes on keyboards, to send MIDI clock to delay pedals. This is simple stuff, but I promise you, like 95%, maybe even as high as 97% of the time, in some cases, 99% of the time, I feel like Anchorman, 99% of the time, it's always this, 50% of the time. It's really easy to miss in this long signal chain, this long flow of things. It's really easy to miss that one cable is unplugged. You think a computer with an audio interface, with a MIDI interface that's then hitting a network switch that then has 4 cables that are going to other network switches that are then going to other MIDI interfaces that are then going to multiple computers. You start to see, is it plugged in? Is it turned on? Sounds really basic, really simple, but you start to see when you expand it to this large network of devices, man, it's really easy to miss that. And it's really easy to make one Ethernet cable that's not fully seated properly, one USB-C cable that's not properly plugged into a computer, and you see how everything else falls down. So number one, to help us find the problem, visualize the problem, visualize signal flow, close your eyes, grab a pen and draw this out if you need to on a piece of paper. Number two, change one thing at a time, test one variable at a time. Don't change multiple things. Number three, start with the simple things. Is it powered on? Is it plugged in? Number four, what's most likely to go wrong? So number four, what's most likely to go wrong? So if we think about this signal chain with a mic, XLR cable interface, Thunderbolt cable to computer, cable out of interface into ATEM. The way some people work when they troubleshoot, particularly people, and I gotta say, I'm normally really good at troubleshooting. I'm normally really cool at just staying calm and in a live scenario, not freaking out, not panicking. But I'm normally pretty good at that. But I have had scenarios where my brain's just clouded or whatever, and something goes wrong with my mic, and I go, That's it. I got to buy a new interface. I know this thing's a piece of junk. I just can't believe blah, blah, blah. And you think about it and you go, okay, between all of those, what do you think is most likely to go wrong? In fact, actually, if you're watching this live on YouTube, you can't do this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anything, but if you happen to be watching this on YouTube, watching the replay or watching live, let me know. In that signal chain, post a comment there. What do you think is the most likely thing to go wrong between a mic XLR cable interface, cable going from the interface to the computer, cable going from the interface to the ATEM Mini? What do you think is most likely to go wrong? It's not the ATEM. It's not the computer. It's not the interface. It's not even the mic. What's the most likely thing to go wrong? That guy right there, the mic cable, right? The actual cable. Sorry for all the crazy audio noise that just happened with me moving that, but it's the cable. Like a cable, that's the cheapest component in this whole process is the cable. Now from there, I would say cable, then it's probably Thunderbolt cable going between, it's the cable going from the interface to the ATEM Mini. That's most likely to go wrong. So those are the things I'm going to check first. I'm going to check the things that are most likely to go wrong as a bonus there, maybe the things that are most, that are easiest to test. So if I'm like sitting right here and I've got an XLR cable next to me, I'm just going to reach down really quickly, replace my XLR cable and try that. Like that's probably the first thing I'm going to do in any scenario. After checking, is it plugged in? Is the cable fully plugged in? Let's check both ends. Boom, go to the other end, check it. Is it plugged in? And then making sure everything's turned on, similar to that, is it unmuted? Like that's kind of the way we want to think. Really simple things. We only want to change one thing at a time, and we want to think about what's most likely to go wrong. Now, final step of this, fifth thing here, is we want to isolate the issue. So we think of our signal flow. We're only going to change one thing at a time. We want to start with simple things to test those. Is it turned on? Is it powered up? Is it unmuted? Something like that. We want to think about what's likely to go wrong. And then we want to try to isolate the issue. A perfect example, just yesterday, I mean, this has nothing to do with live production, but perfect example yesterday. My neighbor called me and said, hey, I'm having issues with my printer. I can't print from my computer. Do you mind coming over and helping? I said, sure. And I told him, I said, the one piece of technology, we can put someone on the moon. We can send civilians to space and do space flight. Elon's going to send people to Mars soon. We still cannot create a printer that actually works. We can't create a printer that functions properly. So I said, no worry. Let me come over. Let me see if I can help you. So I get over there and I start looking at the printer. And so again, think about the issue he had, that he said, I can't print from my computer to my printer. And so I walk over with his printer. I said, let's isolate the variables here. Let's try just the printer itself, as opposed to trying the computer to print and then connect to the printer. So I ran this test. I tried to just take a piece of paper that he had, scan it in, make a copy, isolated the variable. I separated the computer from the printer and realized, it's something actually with the printer itself. It has nothing to do with the computer. It has something to do with the printer itself. If I went into this and didn't isolate those variables, then I could have spent tons of time going, all right, let's install new print drivers. Let's do this. Let's do that. As opposed to going, okay, let's just isolate the variables here and say, let's just try the printer by itself. Does that even work? No, it doesn't. Okay, then there's no reason to move forward. So as you're thinking about that signal flow, the signal chain, a common occurrence I do is, a common example that I typically use is, I've got Ableton Live. I've got, let's say, a Play Audio 12. This is going to be pretty complex, but it's happens often. Ableton Live connected to Play Audio 12, Play Audio 12 connected to a Mio XM Ethernet to a network switch, and then Ethernet to another network switch, and then Ethernet to a computer. On that computer, I am doing an RTP MIDI session that's then accepting MIDI and then is sending that to ProPresenter to change lyrics. And so I have that whole signal path. And the reason I have that signal path is I want to send MIDI cues from Ableton Live to the Play Audio 12 to the Mio XM redundantly, so that if my A computer goes down, my B computer keeps going. I want to send those cues to then control lyrics in ProPresenter, send MIDI cues to control lyrics in ProPresenter. So typically in a scenario like that, I'm going to isolate variables when I'm going to think signal flow, and I'm going to think in chunks. So first off, I check from Ableton to play audio 12. Is my play audio 12 showing that it's getting signal? It's showing that it's getting MIDI signal. If it is, great. Then I move to the next chain. Is my Mio XM, and I love the Mio XM because the front panel will flash when it receives MIDI. If I'm sending MIDI notes from Ableton through the play audio 12 to the XM, and I don't see it flash on the XM, then I know that the problem is from the XM to my computer. Does that make sense? I'm not going to then go continue tracing it down, because what you see a lot of times, I think, with people that don't understand troubleshooting, will do unnecessary steps thinking, okay, I'm going to isolate. I find it's the Mio XM. And I say, oh, I think it's the Mio XM. And they'll say, oh, do you think I should restart the ProPresenter computer? And I'm like, well, maybe you should, but the problem is not with the computer, right? Does that make sense to you? If you can isolate the variable and you can figure out that, okay, I'm having an issue somewhere between my computer and the XM, then we're not going to deal with everything from the XM to the computer. Hopefully that makes sense. So again, when it comes to finding the problem, super helpful, visualize the path, the signal flow. Number 2, change one thing at a time. Number 3, start with the simple things. Is it on? Is it plugged in? Is it unmuted? That kind of applies to the audio side of things. Number 4, what's most likely to go wrong? Don't, switch out your audio interface and buy a brand new mic off Amazon when it's just your XLR cable. Try that first. And then 5, and finally here, isolate the issue. Figure out where in the chain, what variable is causing the issue, up until what point does it work, and then work backwards from there. Once you find the issue, work backwards from there, and apply those same principles. You figure out it's a Mio XM, check your cables, check your power from everything there to there, check your routing, those sorts of things, and you'll find it. But there's a possible scenario where you walk through all of that and you still can't find the problem. So yes, at the top, we pause and breathe. Number 2, we try to find the problem. But number 3, what do you do if you can't actually find the problem? I want to introduce you to one of my favorite stories and this is from the book, The Pragmatic Programmer. And this is the idea of, in computer development, you're working on software, something is going wrong and you can't figure out what the problem is. You're working by yourself as a computer software engineer, and you're writing tons and tons of code, and you go to run it, compile it, and run it, and just things are not working. And you're going, man, I just cannot for the life of me figure this out, right? And so in The Pragmatic Programmer, one of the things that the author suggests is rubber ducky debugging. And it's this idea of get a rubber ducky, put it right in front of you, and verbally explain the problem to the rubber ducky and go, okay, I'm walking through my code. So in the code, I have this and I have, and almost every time that happens, you'll catch yourself. As soon as you start to verbalize it, as soon as you start to say it out loud, you'll catch yourself and you'll discover the problem. If you're around other people and you don't have a rubber ducky, then just talk to someone else. An example I often give is not too long ago, I was at an event with my buddy James, and James was running audio, and he had to set up a floor wedge, which is something we don't do often in live production, but he had to set up a floor wedge, and he had to run a mic to that floor wedge for the speaker to hear. So he's walking through the process, and he just could not get the floor wedge to work. And he's just kind of scratching his head like, man, what in the world's happening? So I said, James, walk me through. Tell me exactly what you did. And he said, well, I connected the wedge, I plugged the cable in, and then I went here to this bus, and I took it from stereo to mono. Oh, and then he realized as he was saying it, his brain thought, oh, I do this all the time. Or I've done this all the time in the past, and I'm supposed to do these steps. So clearly it's not moving from a stereo bus to a mono bus, because I've done that. But then when you verbalize that and you look and you follow it, he discovered the problem. So if you have taken a deep breath, number 2, you've tried to find the problem and you can't find the problem, then try a little bit of rubber ducky debugging. Turn to the person next to you and say, this is going to be weird, but can you stand here for a second so I could just talk to you and explain this, and we'll see if we can find the problem. Now, at that point, if you walk through all those scenarios and you can't find the problem, the rubber ducky hasn't helped, then just start praying, because that's the last thing you have for you. But at that point, hopefully you found the problem. So now number 4, now that we found the problem, we need to fix the problem. Okay. So when it comes to fixing the problem, there's really two solutions here. I mean, again, I'm going to try to make this super simple. There's really two solutions at this point. Our first solution is to replace it. So we've discovered that we found the problem, and it's a cable that's not working from my computer to my Play Audio 12. Well, at that point, I'm going to replace the cable from what I have to another cable. I'm going to try a different cable there, right? And if that works, great. We move on, problem solved. This is a great reason to have redundancy, to have backups, to use a Play Audio 12. So if your first computer you're having issues, but your second computer is working, then run with that and try to figure out how to fix your first computer while you're running on your second computer. That's a reason to have redundancy, to have backups. It's also a reason with cables to have extra cables. Like that's super important that, I've got these little USB-C cables. Oh, my hard drive fell. I've got these USB-C cables all in my office. I've got a bucket back there, and I've got tons of them because these things go bad pretty easily. And I use them for everything from my ATEM to my hard drives to my audio interface. And so I've got extra cables. I'm not going to show up to a gig with one cable and hoping that that's going to work. I always say that hope is a terrible backup plan. Don't hope that something's going to work. Actually have a backup plan. Actually do the work to test it. Be prepared. Spend the time to be prepared, and you're going to end up being good. So we have the option of replacing it, right? We use a backup cable. Hopefully we've got a backup cable. But what's our second option here? Maybe to swap it out, to back it up. It's going to take too long. Maybe you goofed and you don't have a backup. What's our second option here? It's to go without it. And that's not a great thing to hear, but hopefully you have a backup plan before you go into this situation. If tracks go wrong, if tracks go down, if we lose ProPresenter lyric automation, what's our backup plan? Maybe our backup plan is we have someone manually trigger, maybe the sound engineer manually reach over, and as she's running sound, it's not going to be great, but as she's running sound, she's pressing spacebar on lyrics and is aware enough that like that's something we're going to have to do. We're not going to plan on it, but we're going to plan that if there were something to go wrong, then that's what we're going to do. Hopefully you've got a backup plan. The second option is, if you don't have a backup plan, then we're going to learn really quickly just to get by without it. So, maybe we just go without lyrics for that particular set. Maybe we don't use that video that we have. That's a great moment in the moment to communicate with the band, the people on stage, that if before song 3, we have a video that starts song 3 and we don't have the ability to trigger that from Ableton, and the sound engineer can't reach over and trigger the video in ProPresenter, then I'm going to get on a talkback mic, or I'm going to do some sort of signal like I'm calling, plays in a baseball game, to let the band know, okay, no video at the beginning, no video. We're just going to go right into the song. And so it's not great. Again, hopefully you have a backup plan. Hopefully you have redundancy. Hopefully you have spare cables, whatever. Hopefully you've made a plan before you get into it. But if you didn't, that's okay. We're just in that moment going to communicate like, hey, we have to run without this, or hey, we have to run without clicking tracks. And then after that moment, after that time, that's hopefully when you go back and say, okay, how do we make sure this never happens again? You, as an individual, you own it, you own the responsibility, and say, here's what happened. I discovered the problem. I didn't have enough time to fix it. Here's how to fix that in the future. Because the thing is, things are going to go wrong. Murphy is consistent. She shows up every time. And if something can't go wrong, it will go wrong. And so you've got to have a backup plan. And again, we all make mistakes. If you made a mistake and something went wrong, fine, own it, learn from it, and don't repeat it again. So when it comes to troubleshooting, really, we're doing two things. We're trying to find the problem. We're trying to fix the problem, right? Walk back through these steps if that helps you, just as a reminder of how to troubleshoot quickly, how to quickly find the problem. Go buy a little rubber ducky if you need to. Borrow your kid's rubber ducky that they used in the bath if you need to, and set it, right on your rack, right on your road case, so that as you're trying to discover your problem, you can reach over and talk to the rubber ducky. So hopefully that helps you. Again, troubleshooting is super important. I think it's the most important skill for anyone in live production to have. Like, it's just going to make your life so much easier. So I hope this episode's been beneficial to you. I know I started this way. I want to end this way as well too. If you're using tracks live on stage, head to FromStudioStage.com/free. No rubber duckies, but we do have a lot of great resources for running tracks that are going to help you go further faster when it comes to using Ableton Live on stage. And so head over there, check it out. All of those are free. And then do me a favor, if you enjoy this content, you like it, do two things for me. This would be amazing. Number one, share it with someone you think that would enjoy it as well too. Maybe make it a piece of content that you share. If you're a worship leader, that you share with your team. If you're a production person at a church, you share with your team. If you're in a band with a bunch of folks, you share it with the fellow band members and go, hey, we got to get our troubleshooting crap together, right? Share this episode with someone that you think would enjoy it. And then two, do me a favor. If you are on iTunes listening to this, then give us a good rating and review, subscribe to the podcast. Spotify, same thing. If you're on YouTube, then hit subscribe, hit the bell icon, enable notifications, leave us a rating review, comment on YouTube if you're watching there. That would mean a lot. Really helps the episode go, helps the show go further faster, to borrow a phrase I used before. But thanks so much for joining me this week. I've got some really great episodes coming up that I'm super excited about that are scheduled. One of the ones we have coming up here soon, I think next week, we're going to talk about how real musicians don't use tracks. And so you're going to find that quite intriguing and interesting. But thanks for sticking around. We'll see you on the next episode. And if you stick around the YouTube channel, then you'll see me every single day at 10 a.m. Central. Thanks for hanging out. Take care, everybody.